I'm here at St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Portland, Oregon, and today is the third day in our novena to St. Joan of Arc. Where to begin? This story is so interesting, and there are certain steps along the story that I have to take you through. So today I'm going to start with just a quick summary of where we're going from Butler's Lives of the Saints, just a couple of paragraphs from the account here, and then I'm going to take you through some documents, some testimonies and such that are very interesting, that will help to tell the story. And then I'll also take you back to Mark Twain's dramatization or fictionalization of it. So let us continue with the entry here in Butler's Lives of the Saints where we left off last time. St. Joan was in her 14th year when she experienced the earliest of those supernatural manifestations which were to lead her through the path of patriotism to death at the stake. At first, it was a single voice addressing her apparently from nearby and accompanied by a blaze of light. Afterward, as the voices increased in number, she was able to see her interlocutors, whom she identified as Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret, and others. Only very gradually did they unfold her mission. It was a mission which might well appall her. She, a simple peasant girl, was to save France. She never spoke about these voices in Domremy. She was too much afraid of her stern father. By May 1928, they had become insistent and explicit. She must present herself at once to Robert Baudricourt, who commanded the king's forces in the neighboring town of Vaucouleurs. Joan succeeded in persuading an uncle who lived near Vaucouleurs to take her to him, but Baudricourt only laughed and dismissed her, saying that her father ought to give her a good hiding. All right, so that's the next part of this story that we must get to, but it unfolds. So now we're going to turn briefly to the account from Mark Twain. The 5th of January, 1429, Joan came to me with her uncle, Laxart, and said, "The time has come. My voices are not vague now, but clear, and they have told me what to do. In 2 months, I shall be with the Dauphin." Her spirits were high and her bearing martial. I caught the infection and felt a great impulse stirring in me. That was like what one feels when he hears the roll of the drums and the tramp of marching men. "I believe it," I said. "I also believe it," said Laxart. "If she had told me before that she was commanded of God to rescue France, I should not have believed. I should have let her seek the governor by her own ways and held myself clear of meddling in the matter, not doubting she was mad. But I have seen her stand before those nobles and mighty men unafraid, and say her say, and she had not been able to do that but by the help of God. That I know. Therefore, with all humbleness, I am at her command to do with me as she will." "My uncle is very good to me," Joan said. "I sent and asked him to come and persuade my mother to let him take me home with him to tend his wife, who is not well. It is arranged, and we go at dawn tomorrow. From his house I shall soon go to Vaucouleurs, and wait and strive until my prayer is granted." Now we skip ahead to chapter 2. After a few days, Laxart took Joan to Vaucouleurs and found lodging and guardianship for her with Catherine Royer, a wheelwright's wife, an honest and good woman. Joan went to Mass regularly. She helped do the housework, earning her keep in that way, and if any wished to talk to her about her mission, and many did, she talked freely, making no concealments regarding the matter now. I was soon housed nearby and witnessed the effects which followed. At once the tidings spread that a young girl was come who was appointed of God to save France. The common people flocked in crowds to look at her and speak with her, and her fair young loveliness won the half of their belief. and her deep earnestness and transparent sincerity won the other half. The well-to-do remained away and scoffed, but that is their way. Next, a prophecy of Merlin's, more than 800 years old, was called to mind, which said that in a far future time France would be lost by a woman and restored by a woman. France was now for the first time lost, and by a woman, Isabel of Bavaria, her base queen. Doubtless, this fair and pure young girl was commissioned of heaven to complete the prophecy. Okay, we'll end there with, for now, from Mark Twain. And I want to just look into this prophecy a little bit. So now I'm turning to the book Joan of Arc Pucelle, which is from the Medieval Studies Department at Manchester University in England. It was translated and annotated by Craig Taylor. And in the introduction to this, and by the way, I have all these three books that I'm turning to are in the bibliography in the description below the video. So you can find out what any of these, how to, look up any of these books. So we're turning now to the introduction to the book of documents on Joan of Arc. And in the introduction, we learn more about this prophecy of Merlin. Okay, so one of the theologians of Poitiers identified Joan with a prophecy of Marie d'Avignon concerning a virgin maiden who would rescue the kingdom by taking up the arms that Marie herself refused to wear. Now, this was apparently recast in a more popular form, judging by the testimony of witnesses at the nullification trial. Durand Laxart and Catherine de Le Royer claimed that Joan knew of a prophecy that effectively presented her as a figure like the Virgin Mary, who would redeem the sins of Eve. It would appear that the supporters and advisors of Charles VII also drew upon a second set of prophecies that were commonly associated with the Venerable Bede and Merlin. Now, thanks to the 14th century English prophet John of Bridlington, Bede was credited with a rather impenetrable chronogram that circulated in Paris in 1429 and was interpreted by the French supporters of Joan as revealing the date of the arrival of a young girl who would carry a banner. Now, keep in mind that the Venerable Bede was writing around the year 800, so many centuries before. More prominently, one of Merlin's prophecies in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, History of the Kings of Britain, was subtly altered in order to predict that a virgin would ride on horseback, fight in armor, and defeat the English archers. It was then used as an inspiration for a new verse prophecy in support of Joan, Virgo Puellares. A more traditional popular tradition grafted onto this prophecy a different statement regarding a maiden who would come from an oak wood and work miracles. This claim was attributed to Merlin in Geoffrey of Monmouth. Joan seems to have been aware of this prediction during the Rouen trial, though she stated that she did not believe it. Okay, so, and then it goes on to talk a little bit more about that. But isn't that interesting? Because you will hear in the book by Mark Twain and in the different testimonies and such, you will hear about this prophecy of Merlin. So it's interesting to know, the source of that. We return to the account then of Mark Twain. This day, too, toward evening, a great rumor went flying abroad through the town, namely, that the very governor himself was going to visit the young girl in her humble lodgings. So in the morning, the streets and lanes were packed with people waiting to see if this strange thing would indeed happen. And happen it did. The governor rode in state, attended by his guards, and the news of it went everywhere and made a great sensation and modified the scoffings of the people of quality and raised Joan's credit higher than ever. The governor had made up his mind to one thing. Joan was either a witch or a saint. And he meant to find out which it was. So he brought a priest with him to exorcise the devil that was in her, in case there was one there. The priest performed his office, but found no devil. He merely hurt Joan's feelings and offended her piety without need, for he had already confessed her before this, and should have known, if he knew anything, that devils cannot abide the confessional, but utter cries of anguish and the most profane and furious cursings whenever they are confronted with that holy office. Well, the governor went away troubled and full of thought, and not knowing what to do. And while he pondered and studied, several days went by, and the 14th of February was come. Then Joan went to the castle and said, "In God's name, Robert de Baudricourt, you are too slow about sending me, and have caused damage thereby, for this day the Dauphin's cause has lost a battle near Orleans, and will suffer yet greater injury if you do not send me to him soon." The governor was perplexed by this speech and said, "Today, child, today? How can you know what has happened in that region today? It would take 8 or 10 days for the word to come." Joan responded, "My voices have brought the word to me, and it is true. A battle was lost today, and you are in fault to delay me so." The governor walked the floor a while, talking within himself, but letting a great oath fall outside now and then, and finally he said, "Hark ye, go in peace, and wait. If it shall turn out as you say, I will give you the letter and send you to the king, and not otherwise." Joan said with fervor, "Now God be thanked. These waiting days are almost done. In 9 days you will fetch me the letter." Well, already the people of Vaucouleurs had given her a horse and had armed and equipped her as a soldier. She got no chance to try the horse and see if she could ride it, for her first great duty was to abide at her post and lift up the hopes and spirits of all who would come to talk with her and prepare them to help in the rescue and regeneration of the kingdom. Okay, now let us turn to, among the various accounts in the Craig Taylor book from the Manchester University Medieval Studies series, we turn to a deposition of Catherine, the wife of Henri Le Royer. And this was the woman that she lived with in Vaucouleurs there for a time. And this is very interesting because it repeats what we've just heard from the Mark Twain account. Catherine reported that Joan was a good and pious girl, and that she had met her when Durand Laxart brought Joan to her house at Vaucouleurs. She declared upon oath that when Joan wished to withdraw, she was in Catherine's house for 3 weeks, in total, at different times. And then Joan spoke to Lord Robert de Baudricourt, asking that he might have her taken to the place where the Dauphin was, but Lord Robert refused. She declared that later she saw Robert de Baudricourt, then captain of the town of Vaucouleurs, and my Lord Jean Fournier enter her house. The priest said to Joan that he had brought a stole, that is, that he was wearing mass vestments, and he exorcised her in front of the captain, adding that if she was a bad creature, she should depart from them, and if she was a good creature, she should approach them. Then Joan drew near the priest and threw herself on her knees before him. She said that the priest had acted poorly because he had heard her confession. And when she saw that Robert did not want to take her to the king, she said, as the witness heard, that she needed to go to the place where the Dauphin was, adding, "Have you not heard this prophecy, that France will be destroyed by a woman and restored by a virgin from the marches of Lorraine?" Well, then the witness remembered having heard these words and was dumbfounded. The witness also declared that Jeanette was very impatient, and time weighed upon her like a pregnant woman, because she was not taken to the Dauphin. Then the witness and many others had so much faith in her words that a certain Jacques Alain and Durand Laxart wished to take and escort her to Saint Nicolas. But they returned to Vaucouleurs because Joan, it was said, declared that it was not honest for her to leave in this way. After their return, some of the inhabitants of the town had tunic, hose, garters, spurs, and other similar things made for her. They bought a horse for her, and Jean de Metz, Bertrand de Poulengy, Collet de Vienne, and 3 others took her to the place where the Dauphin was. She saw them mount her horses and ride away. Okay, so just filling in some of the details here. Now let us open up to Mark Twain again for a dramatization of her entrance to see the king. And this is very interesting. Okay. When we entered the great entrance hall, there it all was, just as I have already painted it. There were ranks of guards in shining armor and with polished halberds. 2 sides of the hall were like flower gardens for a variety of color and the magnificence of the costumes. Light streamed upon these masses of color from 250 flambeaux. There was a wide, free space down the middle of the hall, and at the end of it was a throne royally canopied, and upon it sat a crowned and sceptered figure, nobly clothed and blazing with jewels. Okay, now, we skip ahead a little bit. The eyes of all others were fixed upon Joan in a gaze of wonder which was half worship, and which seemed to say, how sweet, how lovely, how divine. All lips were parted and motionless, which was a sure sign that those people who seldom forget themselves had forgotten themselves now, and were not conscious of anything but the one object they were gazing upon. They had the look of people who are under the enchantment of a vision. Then they presently began to come to life again, rousing themselves out of the spell and shaking it off as one drives away little by little a clinging drowsiness or intoxication. Now they fixed their attention upon Joan with a strong new interest of another sort. They were full of curiosity to see what she would do. They, having a secret and particular reason for this curiosity, so they watched. And this is what they saw. She made no obeisance, nor even any slight inclination of her head, but stood looking toward the throne in silence. That was all there was to see at present. I glanced up at de Metz and was shocked at the paleness of his face. I whispered and said, "What is it, man? What is it?" His answering whisper was so weak I could hardly catch it. "They have taken advantage of the hint in her letter to play a trick upon her. She will err, and they will laugh at her. That is not the king that sits there." Then I glanced at Joan. She was still gazing steadfastly toward the throne, and I had the curious fancy that even her shoulders and the back of her head expressed bewilderment. Now she turned her head slowly, and her eye wandered along the lines of standing courtiers till it fell upon a young man who was very quietly dressed. Then her face lighted joyously, and she ran and threw herself at his feet and clasped his hands, exclaiming in that soft, melodious voice which was her birthright and was now charged with deep and tender feeling, "God of his grace give you long life, O dear and gentle Dauphin." In his astonishment, de Metz cried out, "By the shadow of God, it is an amazing thing." Then he mashed all the bones of my hand in his grateful grip, and added with a proud shake of his mane, "Now, what have these painted infidels to say?" Meanwhile, the young person in the plain clothes was saying to Joan, "Ah, you mistake, my child. I am not the king. There he is." And he pointed toward the throne. The knight's face clouded, and he muttered in grief and indignation, "Ah, it is a shame to use her so, but for this lie she had gone through safe. I will go and proclaim to all the house what—" "Stay where you are," whispered I, and the Sieur Bertrand in a breath, and made him stop in his place. Joan did not stir from her knees, but still lifted her happy face toward the king and said, "No, gracious liege, you are he, and none other." De Metz's troubles vanished away, and he said, "Verily, she was not guessing, she knew." Now how could she know? It is a miracle. I am content, and I will meddle no more, for I perceive that she is equal to her occasions, having that in her head that cannot profitably be helped by the vacancy that is in mine. Well, this interruption of his lost me a remark or two of the other talk. However, I caught the king's next question. But tell me who you are, and what would you? I am called Joan the maid, and am sent to say that the King of Heaven wills that you be crowned and consecrated in your good city of Rheims, and be thereafter lieutenant to the Lord of Heaven, who is King of France. And he willed also that you set me at my appointed work, and give me men at arms. After a slight pause, she added, her eye lighting at the sound of her words, for then will I raise the siege of Orleans and break the English power. The young monarch's amused face sobered a little when this martial speech fell upon that sick air like a breath blown from embattled camps and fields of war, and his trifling smile presently faded wholly away and disappeared. He was grave now and thoughtful. After a little, he waved his hand lightly, and all the people fell away and left those two by themselves in a vacant space. The knights and I moved to the opposite side of the hall and stood there. We saw Joan rise at a sign, then she and the king talked privately together. And we will end there for today. What a great story. Well, now let us pray our Novena prayer, and you can find in the description below this video a link where you can print out the Novena Prayers, print up double-sided with a short-sided binding and fold it in half, and you have a little booklet. And you can find another link in the description below this video for another video to pray along with me here in the chapel, the Novena Prayers themselves. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Saint Joan of Arc, Apostle of the Kingship of Christ, pray for us. Join me tomorrow for day 4, and don't miss a day of prayer with us.